Hi everyone, good afternoon. Hope you've had a nice lunch, and obviously this next subject is a bit of emotive, so if you do need to leave the room or you want to talk to us after, please come and see us. My name's Zoe Budge. I'm the welfare leader mental health practitioner for North Wales, and this is my colleague Elaine.
I'm a serving police officer of 22 years, but worked alongside occupational health for about the last 7-8 years, having been trained as a psychotherapist and a counsellor to support colleagues and staff.
So we're here today, unfortunately, we were asked to implement the College of Policing suicide toolkit, which they worked alongside the Samaritans. At the time when we were asked by our senior leaders to compress it, we didn't realise that in 2 months down the line we would be actually using it. So what we would like to share with you today is how we kind of used it, but the most important thing, what we learned, was to listen to that team, and what we've learned from using it and put it in place. Oops. So, like I said, we were asked, we were tasked to set up a working group alongside College of Policing and Samaritans to simplify their toolkit on suicide post-prevention. So what we did, we set up a working group with myself. We looked at some of the people that we thought would be involved in that, such as the control incident manager, because that's the first place where the incident comes in. So we wanted their opinion, what they would like from that. We also looked at our PVPU strategic lead, yes, I managed to say that, who was involved in also doing in-force suicide work as well. And we also brought in Federation and Unison to get their views on what they thought was needed. So once we did that, we looked at how to simplify the document. So we came up with looking at an A4 document of what was needed in those first 24 hours, 48 hours after that initial call came in. So it's not very clear. But what we kind of found is once we had that initial call that an officer had taken his own life, we looked at what did we need to do. So Elaine will explain her role in it because she was on the front line being directed by myself from Gold meeting. So it's looking at who was involved, and it wasn't just the team, it was like family liaison officers, the control room, the wider team to manage that. Then looking at what we needed to bring, what resources we had locally, and then looking at further down the line what resources we would need to. So that's calling on another force to bring in their peer supporters to support us at this time. So luckily for us, in one way, the force incident manager who was working with us in the working group was actually on duty that day. So was very quick to implement our plan. So what we looked at, again, like I've said, is making sure the staff involved, what they wanted. And I think from all of this, the main learning, and when we did reflective practice after the incident, is listen to that team. And don't be afraid. For me, I was a police staff going to those Gold meetings. I don't know if there's any senior managers here, but it's quite daunting when you're having to go and ask for resources. You know, listen to what we're asking. If you learn nothing else from today, listen to what that team wants, because that is part of the recovery process. So again, like I said, we looked at working with the senior management team, making sure that the rota that we're working with, their views were listened to. We also kind of checked in with what the family wanted as well. So that was very important, and liaising that back to Gold. So it wasn't what Gold was thinking, what was needed, it was listening to what the family wanted at that time. Because what we found with the rota is having that expectation that that officer wasn't going to come back and do that shift the next day. So we also looked within house what we had available. Did we have enough resources, and where would we go? So that was kind of in the first 24 hours. So we looked at our chaplain support and just making sure that they were aware, our peer supporters, and also what counselling provisions we had in place. One of the things the rota wanted to do was to lay some flowers. That was very important to them. Elaine will explain how she managed that, working on the front line as we were kind of feeding that back up to Goal Command. And we then looked at what of the plan did the debrief. So we did an informal one with the team, defused the situation, also looked at senior managers working and supporting them as well, before we looked at doing a formal debrief. We were very lucky at the time that one of the senior managers working with us on the front line was very supportive and made sure that what we requested was put into place. Some of the things that we kind of learnt from that was making sure that those people, the rota that was involved, also the police officers' rota, that did they want to stay and work? Did they want to go home when we sent them home? That they had that support, and then that we do that check-in the next day just to make sure everything was okay. So I guess, like I said, when we kind of reflected, it's looking at not just that team, the wider ripple aspect of it. And I think the main thing I can't stress enough is if anything happens within your force, is just be, listen to what those individuals want. So what I will do now is hand over to my colleague who managed that on the front line, just to give you an example of what we did.
So my role within North Wales Police is as a welfare and engagement officer. So I regularly visit the rotas, different teams, to offer that support, making sure they've got wraparound support, knowing the signposting available and how to access information on the system. So for me, it was quite lucky that I'd already got really well made connections with those rotas. So this happened in the east of our division. So to put some context around it, we come from North Wales, beautiful area and many, many beauty hotspots. It's lovely there. This particular area was the east of our division. It's separated into a west, central, east. In this particular locality, there's an aqueduct and it's a real hotspot for suicides. We're working tirelessly with local governments, with local charities, with local communities to address the issues we've got going on there. Fabulous work. But this particular aqueduct, and we've got an aqueduct and a viaduct, unfortunately, there. So our colleague took his life on that actual aqueduct where he worked and where his colleagues worked. For us, it was a different rota than the rota he would have been working on, but it was the next along. So we had that situation where he'd taken his own life in the area he worked, amongst the colleagues he worked with. And so when the call initially came in, we reached out to the colleagues who were working on that day, and we offered that welfare check-in, check-out system. The feedback that we received from the initial day was very much along the lines of, they were quite cross that senior management had wanted to remove them from the scene. Any of you that are police officers, police staff know the pride that goes into working in policing, and they wanted to be at that job and finish that job, and they didn't want to be removed from working. And all they asked was, why didn't you ask me first? Why did you start bringing resources in when I'd handled the situation? I was looking after the teams. Why didn't you just ask me what I wanted? So that was the feedback that came from the initial day. So the following day, we knew that the rota that he was attached to was due to come back on duty. So an open invitation went out to everybody to group at the police station. And this was people that were far-reaching, not just the rota that he was working with, but predominantly those. So I arrived there first thing in the morning, and we had a great senior management superintendent. He was there as well, making sure we had that wraparound support. Zoe was liaising with the Gold Command, and as you can imagine, very dynamic, lots of back and forth in communications. One of the things the rota wanted to do was to go to the aqueduct and lay flowers. This was initially met with quite a lot of negativity from the senior management team, thinking that was inappropriate and not the right thing to do. This was something that was led by consultation from the rota and those around him. They knew that they would have to come back on duty, go to that place to deal with people on that bridge,
next day, the next week. So they were really passionate that they had that opportunity to do it in their space, in their time. This was fed back up, and eventually we were allowed to walk with the sower. As long as I was present, we were allowed to go and take flowers to that. And as a group, it was really powerful. It was a real powerful moment for them just to share their love, experience, their stories. It was very sad, but they were allowed to do that in their time, not forced upon them by an incident coming in. Following on from that, the support was put in place. We made sure that we got counsellors available. We made sure that there was peer supporters available. But we also recognised for that particular team that this would have to be, we're very good in policing, aren't we, at knee-jerk. We can get straight in, we're very reactive, we can deal with it there and then. We're not so good at that long-term planning. So we made sure that we got touch bases 2 weeks, a month, to make sure that they knew that that wraparound support was continuous. And actually that's something that we needed to be put in place, because they might be okay for the next day or the next week. But what we found through experience was actually those referrals really for the impact of this came in probably 4 to 6 months later. They suddenly realised the impact it had had on them, and it wasn't the initial shock of what had happened. The rotas themselves, thanks to our senior management team, were allowed to make the decision. Obviously, we said on that particular day they came back in, please don't work. We're asking you please not to work today. Be here, be amongst colleagues, be amongst friends, but please don't work. The next set of shifts after that, they were given the opportunity to decide. You can stay in the station, you can go home. We prefer, and what we reiterated, we prefer you to stay together because this is where you need to be as part of your team. But if you feel it's most benefit for you to take this space and time, as long as we know that there's support at home for you, you do that. So senior management team had already put in place resources to cover all the duties for that particular next block of shifts. Some of the officers decided that they wanted to work. It was their job, it was their duty, and that's how they are. But what we made sure was that control room, who were also deeply impacted, because it's one of us, isn't it? It's one of ours. Made sure that any jobs that were related to that bridge or to suicide were dispatched out of the area for that particular couple of weeks. Make sure we just gave them that decompression space, which is so hard to find in policing. We also made sure that they knew that that support was continuous, that somebody would be there listening to them when they needed it, whether it was inside the organisation or outside the organisation. We made clear that we provided counselling that was external to us, and obviously the support that we've got wrapped around us. Some of the things that we really realised the impact of was that ripple effect. So we did a critical incident debrief with those who attended the incident. We did a general defuse for those who just wanted to question the grief, the questions, the why. It was your typical didn't see it coming moment. It was the typical why didn't I spot anything wrong? You wouldn't, nobody would have done. But then we realised that he worked alongside other rotas. He worked along other parts of the division. This news had transcended the whole force. When a force hears a news like that, actually we're quite small, we come together. And what we were starting to realise that people were starting to be impacted who worked 100 miles away at the other end of the force, because they started to see a sense of, could that be me? I've had suicidal ideation thoughts. I have had moments where I don't know what to do. And those sorts of referrals were starting to come in through to Zoe and through to the welfare team. So we made sure that we had our welfare officers in each area to support everybody, and knowing that that open communication, that confidentiality was there should they need to reach out. Some of the learning that came from this, and unfortunately through other deaths that we've had in the organisation, was the small things, like what happens to his uniform? What happens to his mug that sits in the canteen? And these were the things that we've learned through experience to ask the team. And this is why we reiterate, as if there's any senior management in here or anybody that's going to be senior management or make decisions, and we know that every decision they were trying to make was with the best will, with the best heart to look after, but sometimes the best decision is to ask the teams, ask the individuals. We didn't want to take his uniform out. We didn't want to remove the mug for fear that it would be distressing. We spoke to the rota and they wanted to deal with it. They felt it was their duty, with the family obviously, with what they wanted to. But the mug sits there, and they're proud of that mug. It's a reflection and it's a reminder of a colleague and a friend. But we could have easily gone in and removed everything for fear it would be triggering, fear that it would cause harm. But the reality is we need to learn by every rota, every area is bespokely different. And that, I think, for us, was some of the best learning that came out of it, was to not only have the feedback going between management, Gold, but actually the front line, management and Gold, that their voices are heard. So although, yeah, it was a really difficult time, they now celebrate his life every year, and they do a blue light walk. They shine blue lights, and it's beautiful. It is beautiful. And the rota come together every year to walk up this mountain with blue lights. But I just hope that from this, the reality is that just make sure that you sometimes ask questions down as well as giving information down. Anybody got any questions? Has it been helpful? Any thought? Food for thought? Oh, sorry, I couldn't see. Do they need mics or not?
I do know the location you're on about, because I actually grew up there. The question I put back, or the observation I put back, is it's fantastic that, you know, this is coming to place. Sadly, the timing in some respects couldn't have been better or worse, whichever way you look at it. But you talked about when there's good supervision or good leadership, and that's the problem we have within policing, whether it be at sergeant rank all the way up through to, you know, senior leadership and command teams. You can't be reliant on good leadership. It's got to be consistent across the piece. And obviously, on your experience, obviously on that day, there was a good superintendent on. So how do we address that balance to make sure that we always get the consistency of approach? I know this is about consistency, but how do we ensure that they are considering these things on a regular basis, in terms of, because you talk about the PIP there and not being able to speak, and, you know, there's got to be a level of engagement, interaction directly after, because that's when you immediately impacted, as long as it doesn't encroach on other policing practices and processes.
We had a varied response to, and it was the superintendent that was with us as the local area superintendent, second to none. But the people that were also sat in Gold, Zoe had quite a few battles of wills. And what they have recognised is we are really great at the reacting, at the managing there and then. But they started to learn that actually she was the expert. It was her mental health knowledge that we needed to bring in. And it wasn't because a chief super and ACPO level was actually directing what required. They suddenly realised by the passion of the feedback that was coming back when they were asked to withdraw from scene, or said there's a possibility that we can't take you on the bridge. That was a learning curve for them. And this is something that we have delivered quite a lot over different forces now, to senior management team, to those that are heading off into the ACPO. So we hope that these small messages start to filter out that actually, just because you know how something runs in practice, it doesn't always actually, you need to be thinking on your feet. But actually it was because of Zoe having to fight back that we actually managed to get the communication. And unfortunately, we try in the best will as we will, leadership courses, emotional intelligence, you have to buy into it. You have to want to be emotionally aware to be able to accept actually sometimes somebody else knows better. And in this case, it was Zoe. You had quite difficulty, didn't you?
Yeah, and I think from this, we are starting to see changes. We've done lots of training packages, making senior management aware, because obviously, you know, they're police officers first, and there's nothing wrong in that. But also to recognise we are human beings, we do have these feelings, and it's important to start talking about it. And I've been in post 5 years now. I worked in health as a mental health nurse, and I'm now starting to see changes, good, in the last year and a half, that people are starting, you know, it's okay to be not okay. It's okay that I have got some mental health issues. I can still do my job, but sometimes I just need to take that time out. So we're getting there. We're starting to see that move forward.
But I guess that's where the cultural leadership has to come in, doesn't it? Bringing those, and actually from both ends, I personally, as a psychotherapist as well, would suggest right from training, we employ active listening skills as part of our training package, as well as interviewing skills, because actually the active listening skills are the ones that we're probably going to use most, whether in interviewing or managing victims, but more importantly, our colleagues, and having those conversations. That would be my wish, but whether I get it in. But I think that's where, and I see a movement. You must all feel that any of you have been in this job long enough, 10, 15 years ago, we wouldn't even be sat here, would we? We wouldn't even be talking about these conversations, but we are now. And it's just keeping that momentum going and understanding that actually we need to listen a bit more and not speak. And I think if you speak to any psychotherapist, the first lesson they learn is don't have a question in your head, listen. Always listen. And if you've got a question in your head, who's it for? And it's usually to satisfy your own curiosity. But the reality is you just need to be able to listen to people and absorb what they're saying in complete and total entirety. But yes, long way to go, but I do think we are slowly getting there. Any other questions?
It's just a positive thing that some of the steps you were talking about, I definitely saw happen when it happened in our force a couple of years ago, which is really helpful to know that it's coming from a proper structure. Yeah, just to confirm that we've seen it happen in our force a couple of years ago, and I saw those stages going through and a call out for people to work overtime for the week to cover their area.
Yeah.
And I think I picked up on the fact they might need the chaplains, but when I messaged somebody, they said, oh, they're already involved really quickly. So it was positive to know that there is this being spread around from yourself to all the other forces, and it is being used.
Because I think we recognise we deal with suicides, don't we? We deal with suicides a lot, but actually how often do we talk about what happens if it happens in our force? How often do we talk about what happens if one of our own takes their life? And I think this is brought to the fore that actually there's a whole host of work that needs to be done around how we look after our force afterwards. And one of the work we did do, which I did forget to mention, was that communication, because obviously his rota were off. And actually, a lot of work went into making sure we got the communication to his rota, to the teams before social media, because we're always fighting the battle now of social media and getting it out from us, not from social media, from the organisation, to try and contact as many people. I think on the slides, which I'm sure Zoe would give to everybody afterwards, it was also remembering that those people on leave or sick leave, and just having that awareness of who needs to be told. Everybody's got WhatsApp groups these days, but the reality is that communication line, and obviously always within conjunction with the family. But yeah, it's really positive. Which force are you?
Staffordshire.
Ah,
yeah.
Lovely. Really positive to know that there are forces. We had some feedback in the last one, but hit and miss from some places, I think.
I think also because we're learning more about this, it might, well, you'd like to hope that it'll help the frontline investigators when they get to a scene of a suicide to maybe pick up on what that family might feel afterwards, because of how the policing families felt after as well. So it might hopefully help shape that initial contact as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Anyone else?
Sorry, again, just two observations. Probably don't need the mic.
Just in case someone's on captions.
I know. Sorry. So, firstly, I think it's fantastic that you talk about it as a police colleagues. So I think policing has been guilty for the 22 years I've been a police officer of thinking of police staff as a poor relation or a secondary. So I'm glad that police colleagues are equally involved within this, because equally they can sadly succumb to it. And I think the point you made about, top down and bottom up is very prevalent or relevant within our force, because we've sadly 2 weeks ago remember a police officer took his life 12 months ago. And I don't think we listened at the time. I think it's only because the people, the rota, the block, the officers who worked alongside this officer came together to hold an event. And I think they brought the force into a kick and a scream and realization that we need to do more. We need to listen. Listening is key.
Yeah.
As you say, those individuals who have been around in that situation at the time are the ones that formulate what it looks like to support that and that wider consideration. So it has got to, it's not, I think we're very guilty within policing in saying it's got to be senior leadership. It's got to be senior leadership embraced, but it's got to be the organisation as a whole to hold the organisation to account.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you. Hello, ladies. I was just wondering, from everything you talked about, the fact you stand up and talk about it, I get, but I just wondered what you learned from a proactive point of view, that you've changed your policies or your stance around to sort of prevent this happening again, and how did you sort of feed that throughout your force so that those things were put in place? So all about the prevention, really, of what's changed since this incident occurred.
I think prior to this coming in, we'd already looked at what was going on within the force, because we're being welfare team, we're there out on the front line, and we were looking at some of the things, the trends that were coming through. So we then looked at bringing in our suicide policy, which we were writing at the time, unbeknown to us. We were writing that in the October. Unfortunately, this happened in the December. So we'd already looked at some training packages. The policy looks at what managers can do so they feel supported, and where they go, what they do. So I think from this, it's kind of a lot of the training has been undertaken. We're going around a lot of these events, kind of making that known. Our organisation is looking at changing the way they work so that we are able to kind of do droppings and put kind of informal debriefs in place, and looking at recruiting more staff for the future. Great.
Any others? We're going to stay around for a little bit, so if anybody wants to reach us on a one-to-one, if anybody has been impacted and just want to have a quick word with us, please don't hesitate to come and drop and say hello, because we know that it's touched the lives of many people, suicide, whether colleagues, family, friends, and a lot of people get quite passionate about it, quite rightly. All we ask is that you take a look at how we've abbreviated the forms that we've done. And if you have any health and wellbeing boards, we feed a lot of our information up through health and wellbeing boards from the information we gather from the front line, is just let them know how important it is that you've got a policy to support something that you hope never happens. But if it did, you would certainly want to be in a position where you've got an idea of what to try and bring into force to support the most important people, which is the colleagues and staff that work amongst you. So it's quite a simple document. And if you require anything from us, we're quite happy to take any emails or drop us a message. Thank you very much.